Hello, Cara. How are you?
I am good. I am excited about today's podcast actually, because, well, last time we didn't have any idea what our theme was going to be, and then you mentioned snakes, and I just went off on talking everything I knew about snakes. So today we are again seeing what is coming up, what is alive for us. But we do at least have a title of a story which you are going to be sharing with us. Mistress of Fire. But I don't know what that story is. And so we are coming into this podcast with me thinking, okay, we are walking towards a flame. And I don't know where the journey is going to take us. And this is both exciting and terrifying.
As life can be sometimes. Yes, it's interesting. I think I'll start with the story at the beginning of this podcast, but I just want to say how it came to me just now. I am in the preparation of a free workshop in German on Hestia, on the ancient Greek goddess of the hearth. Because she's been my guide and companion for the last year, and I really feel her energy wants to go out into the world. So I'm going to do an introductory workshop to Hestia in the beginning of December. And fire, the inner fire and the outer fire, has been a theme for me these past few weeks, as it's been very cold, very rainy, very ewy in southern Germany, and I am very, very glad that I do have a fireplace in my house, because if I didn't, it would be very, very bad. And so, yes, I think the Mistress of Fire is quite a story for these times, and also for this episode.
Sounds wonderful. Do you know, I was listening to Mythos on the way up the road, so I'm visiting my sister for the next couple of days, looking after her dogs. And as I was driving up, I was listening to Hestia. And just that whole idea of the home and the hearth and the heart of place and so on. And of course, the first thing that I did when I arrived here was I checked. My sister has a wonderful wood-burning stove, so I haven't lit it yet, but as the darkness falls, I will be lighting that stove and sitting next to the fire this evening, so I would love to hear the story.
And it is a story that I first read in a book that our joint friend Kirsten Milliken gave me, or told me about, and it is about the Selkap people, and it takes place in Russia. Far, far away to the northeast, there lies a land where the winters are almost unbearably cold, where the forests are almost unbearably dark, where the nights are long and the days are short. And in that place, having a fire means the difference between life and death. There once was a village, and all the hunters in that village had decided to go out to hunt for their families. And the women and children stayed behind, looking after each other and looking after the fires, tending the fires. And in that village there lived a young woman who had just become a mother. And she stayed behind with her infant baby boy, rocking him, singing to him, enjoying his presence and warmth, and also tending to the fire in their tent. At one point, she bent down and she placed another log onto the fire, gently rocking her baby all the while. The flames started licking at the log, and, as is fire's way, sparks flew. And one of the tiny sparks hit the little boy's cheek, and instantly he wailed with pain. The mother, hearing this, seeing this, became angry. She grew so angry that she looked about for anything to poke the fire with. And she reached for a poker of cold iron, and she screamed and yelled at the fire, saying, "How dare you? How dare you treat my son this way? How dare you hurt him? Just you wait." And she poked at the fire with the cold iron. But that didn't do anything much to the fire, or so it seemed. In her rage, she cast about for something else, and her glance fell onto a great big jug of water. And she grabbed it and threw it onto the fire, extinguishing it completely. As she sat in the darkness, comforting her son, whose wails turned into whimpers and then grew silent, as cold descended upon the tent, her temper also cooled. And there came a point when she felt in her heart a great remorse, and she decided to get the fire going again. So she wrapped her son in a blanket, placed him on the floor, and then she set about tending the fire again. But, try as she might, she was unable to get a fire going. She tried, and she tried, and she tried. There wasn't a single spark, not the teeniest, tiniest speck of that golden, promising light. When, with all her efforts, she was unable to get a fire going, she decided to go next door, to take some kindling and go next door and ask whether they could help her light her fire again. So she picked up her son, and she wrapped both of them in a warm fur, and then she grabbed a piece of kindling, and she left the tent and went next door. Oh, and as she went out into the frost and cold, she could hear laughter. She could hear women's voices singing and talking to each other. And she felt a great relief. Soon she would have her fire, and she could take it back to the tent and get her own fire going again. As she approached the tent, she put her hand to the tent flap and lifted it and was just about to go inside when the fire inside that tent went out. "What's going on? What happened to our fire?" The women were astonished. "Who's there? Come in or go out, but please leave the warmth that is in the tent with us." So the young woman closed the tent flap again, and through the crunching snow, she went to the next tent, because surely there she could receive some help. And she could hear the laughter and the singing and the voices of women inside that tent, but as soon as she had put her hand to the tent flap, lifting it, the fire inside that tent went out. And so it was with the next tent, and the next one, and the one after that. And with every tent, her despair grew, her fear grew, her heart was pounding more loudly in her chest. And finally, she had reached the last tent of the village. And sparks were coming out of the smoke hole, and she knew this was where the wise woman lived, on her own. Surely, here she would receive help, finally. Surely, this woman was so powerful that the fire was going to stay lit. And she put her hand to the tent flap, and carefully, silently, she lifted it up, and the fire inside that tent, the last fire of the village, had gone out. "Who's there? What have you done to my fire?" "It's me," the young woman said. "Come on in already. What have you done?" And at that, the words just spilled out of the young mother. Holding and rocking her baby in the dark, she told the old woman all about the fire, about the spark, about her son's wailing, about her poking at the fire with cold iron, and about her dousing it with water. "Are you insane, girl? How could you have done that? Lead me to your tent immediately, now! Time is of the essence." And so, through the crunching snow, they made their way back to the tent, guessing more than seeing, as it was completely dark. When they had reached it, the old woman ducked inside, followed by the young mother and the child, and she knelt in front of the fireplace, and she immediately started murmuring words. "Mistress, mistress, I am so sorry. She did not know what she was doing. She's young. Please, I beg you, come back to us, mistress." And she tried with the sodden embers, and she tried striking the fire, lighting it. There was no spark, no sign of the mistress of fire. And to the young woman it seemed like an eternity that the old crone was kneeling in the ashes, murmuring, whispering, imploring. And then, after an endless time, there was a glow. Tiny, but then it grew in blue and in red and yellow, and there, out of the soggy ashes, rose the mistress of fire. And she stood, towering over the two women. She was dressed in a grey dress and a red cloak, blue flames dancing all about her person, and she looked at them, glaring. And then she said, "How dare you call me here? She has offended me greatly." "I know, mistress, I know. She's but young. She didn't know any better. I beg of you, please return to us, or else we shall perish." "She should have thought about this before she poked at me with cold iron." I know, mistress." And so it went back and forth for a while. But then the mistress of fire said, "Well, all right, but there's one condition. You shall have your fire, but only if she gives up her son." "What? No!" The young woman was terrified. How could she ever let go of her precious baby boy? The old crone got up, and she went and stood right in front of the young mother, and she looked her in the eye, and she said, "This is up to you, girl. Either you hand your son to the mistress of fire, or the whole village is going to perish. Choose." Silence fell. Nothing was to be heard except the low howling of the wind outside. And then, tears streaming down her face, the young mother kissed her son and handed him over to the mistress of fire. Surprisingly tenderly, the woman wrapped the baby boy in her shawls, and then she touched one hand to the soggy embers, and fire appeared, licking at the log, sparks flying high and high and higher through the smoke hole, and immediately there was warmth and there was life in that tent. And then the mistress of fire looked once more at the two women and said, "Know this, never, ever again touch me with cold iron. Remember this, or else you shall perish." And with that, she became translucent, see-through, and disappeared, babe in arms. The mother stood in shock and grief. But the old crone went over, put one hand to her cheek and said, "Stories will be told about you. Stories about how you saved the Selkup."
Wow. That is such a powerful story. Oh, so many layers to it. Goodness. What is it about that story that called to you when you first came across it?
That's a very good question. It's like that story has a very deep and ancient ring of truth to it. That's the feeling I got when first I heard it or read it. And there's something of the goddess in it. There's something that tells me about boundaries, about having, about the necessity of reining in our destructive impulses. And it's interesting, I ran a workshop within the Symposium of Martha Alter Hines in June this year, where I told this story and I told about Hestia, and we worked with the energy of fire, and it was very interesting to hear people's reactions. There was one woman who described that over the course of the workshop, she felt a lot of resistance because she doesn't very much think in metaphor, but she's a very direct thinker. And so the idea of a woman having to sacrifice her child brought with it a lot of negative emotions. And then we started delving into that metaphor. And for me, ever since I heard that story, the child has been quite metaphorical. And it's something precious. The most precious thing is the only way, like paying that price is the only way of regaining, of repairing a certain kind of damage to the community. And I think that energetic signature is something that rings very, very true to me, and that drew me to that story.
Yeah, I can completely see that. I mean, I think there is the more literal meaning of in the past people had to sacrifice their children for one reason or another, and sometimes they had to choose which children to sacrifice. Or, I mean, there are so many stories, oh my goodness, and so many of our old, like deep, ancient stories are about abandoning children or giving up children or something for the greater good, whatever that happens to be. And I think that story really does. I mean, it's that whole ethical question about, do you sacrifice the one person or the one thing that you love the most for the greater good, or do you sacrifice the greater number of people or whatever for the love of one person or the love of one thing? And gosh, yeah, I mean, we are in such times that we need to start looking at what it is that we value. I mean, people have always had to consider what is valuable to them in whatever way, but I think at the moment, with the world facing ecological crisis and so on, and just some of the ways our society runs, it's what do we really value? What are we truly prepared to give up as well, to have the the most sustainable, the most heartfelt, wholesome community that we can. And I think that must have been such a difficult choice to make. So no, thank you for bringing that story. And yeah, as we come into this time of year as well, we're recording this in November, and it is cold and it is getting darker in the evenings, and fire is such an important... I mean, we wouldn't be who we are as a species without fire. Fire really has been the building block of humanity. I mean, Hestia herself, getting back to the goddess, I mean, Hestia was the first and last born, depending on the way that you look at the Greek myth. So she was the firstborn of Kronos and Rhea. But then when she was swallowed and then spat up again, she was the last born. So it's that whole first and last, and yeah, fire, home, hearth, family, community is the first and last of us. And I am feeling so much gratitude for having brought this. I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about the crone and the wisdom that you see within the crone, and that idea of her having to come and confront in some way the goddess figure.
Ooh, I like where you're going with this. And it's interesting, as always, I mean, stories take us by the hand and tend to be a bit different each time we tell. And the crone was especially vibrant for me this time around. And I think for me, she stands for the unbroken lineage of knowledge. But it seems to not have reached the young woman. So there's a broken link. And so it makes sense to me that the crone is the one having to start repairing the damage. Because there's been some kind of neglect in passing on the stories of, you know, this theme that we find in many stories of the fae folk or the otherworldly beings abhor cold iron. They can't stand it. And that, of course, brings us back to the pre-Iron Ages, where, you know, things were so much more connected to the other world, the unseen realms. And that knowledge lies with the crone in that case. And I think as tradition bearers, I love that you yourself said a while ago that one of your mantras or sentences that you have as guiding lights is that you are made mother and crone in one person. And I think that holds true for us storytellers, absolutely. Like, they are all inside us. And so sometimes we're asked to carry on the traditional knowledge and to pass on the stories again because they're almost lost, but not quite. And that I think is what the crone in this story represents to me.
It's interesting that we have almost, I mean, I know the young woman in the story, she is a mother, but she is a new mother. She still feels very much like that maiden figure. She hasn't learnt. She is still new and fresh in the world. And then we have the crone. And it's almost like the mother figure is missing. We have the images of the other tents and the women singing and so on. But yeah, it almost feels like something has passed her by. As you say, that missing link. And so often in stories, the mother figure is missing. And I think that is such a shame, because I am sure that in the past the mother stories would have been there, and the mother stories would have been very central. I mean, we think of the ancient religions before the severing, as you say, that disconnect. It was all about the mother figure. And I mean, if we think just about the basics of biology, then you come from your mother, regardless of who you are. That is your first universe, is your mother. So to have that severance, and to me, this story does feel like that severance. And I think as well with the iron bar, yes, that cold iron and attacking that fire. It is that violence against nature, that violence against it. And then the pouring of the water. When you said about the pouring of the big jug of water and dousing the fire, I could feel myself tensing up, because I know from my own point of view, having spent many years camping, having had fires that have nourished me through the winter and so on, the worst thing that you can do to a fire is to pour cold water on it. I mean, when I was a ranger, the number of times I would come across abandoned campfires that had cold water poured on them, and you just leave this charred mess behind that is no use for anything. You cannot relight a fire when it has been doused like that. So I could totally see where the goddess was coming from. Like, of course she'd be angry. Of course she'd be furious. How can you do this? And I just thought that was so well manifested through the story, this idea that actually it's a waste. It's a waste of water. It's a waste of wood. It's a waste of fuel. It's a waste of that energy of the fire, and something that is so core to our humanity and who we are. I mean, there is no other species on Earth. No, that's not true. I was going to say there's no other species on Earth that harnesses the power of fire, but of course the trees do. And the trees are experts at knowing how to survive fires, how to use fires for their advantage, and so on. When we had the famous case in North America where the Forest Service was managing the woods in such a way to prevent wildfires, and then they realised that over a 40, 50, 60-year period, there were no saplings in the woods because the seeds needed the fire to actually germinate. And that's the thing, as humans, I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. I almost did it there. We think we know better than actually the old elements that were there, but the older species, we are the young upstarts. We are the species that is one of the youngest on the planet. Hominids, humans, have been around for, 200,000 years in one form or another. It's nothing. It's a blink. And the Mistress of Fire, she feels like that old elemental being.
Wow. There's so many avenues again that we can go down with this. I'll start at the back. I would say that yes, we are the youngest species, perhaps, but that only goes for our mortal flesh. And we are as ancient as the Mistress of Fire. Most of us are, anyway. Our souls are eternal. And that's what story brings back for me. That's one of the things story brings, is the remembering of that fact. And I think that's what I meant in the beginning when I said it rings like an ancient truth that I recognize. I wouldn't be able to deeply take in this story if it weren't something that's present in me, because we can't recognize things that we don't know. And so that's one thing. But the missing mother element, that's a new one for me. I've been telling this story for about 2 years now, but that's yet another angle that I hadn't quite understood or been aware of. And as I'm moving into next year, I'm in the preparation of a goddess project again, and it's going to be around the 6 main goddess archetypes from Olympus, plus Hestia. And Demeter, of course, is one of them. And she's, in Greek mythology, she's the essence of mother. And she's going to come last. She's at the end of the project. Because in creating the project, I'm realizing more and more that the mother element as an energy is missing very strongly in our society at the moment. Which is why we treat our oldest mother, the earth, like dirt. Because we have forgotten to honor the mother, and also to honor the mother in us. And this is going to be an interesting one for me, because I have not given birth to a child yet. I'm not a mother of a flesh and bone being. I'm the mother of many projects and creative ideas and stories and things. But I have that energy in me. And the goddess project, the year that we're going to travel together, is going to awaken these archetypal forces in the women that take part. And it's one thing that I've understood is that 3,000 years ago, the great mother that was there at the beginning of all things started to split up in several parts. Women had to split this main primal force within them into segments. And these segments, such as, if you want to go with the archetypes, such as Artemis and Athena and Demeter and Aphrodite, of course, they all carry different energies. But because they've been split in the feminine psyche and in the world, they keep warring with each other. Within ourselves, we have this war going on of the feminine archetypes. And to bring those back together, to remember that they are one, that they are the great mother, that's the path I'm going to walk in the coming year. And I'm really looking forward to that. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that a while ago, I ran a workshop with a friend and we called it Creatress of All. And it was about goddess stories and creating a goddess figurine out of clay. And my friend brought large sheets of paper on which she had drawn some of the most ancient findings of figurines that we have in Europe. And it was so interesting, the things she told us. Because in the earliest days, there were no goddesses. These were ancestors. They were great mothers. And of course, we know the Venus of Willensdorf and these kinds of figurines, you know, huge breasts, huge hips, huge belly. They were the embodiment of nourishment, of survival, of thriving. And many of these figurines used to be, they couldn't stand, but they had like a cone-shaped bottom, and they would be stuck into the earth next to the hearth, so that the ancestors, the primal mothers, were present where life was taking place. And then as time moved on with ice ages and things that happened to humanity, and then patriarchy coming to the forefront, these figurines changed. And especially their breasts, grew tiny. So the importance of that flow of life essence changed. With people settling down, you know, growing crops, all these things. Whereas before, when they had to move from place to place, mother's milk, breast milk, would be the first, how do you say that in English, staple? The first thing that people would survive on. And much longer than today, like 5 years, 6 years, that's all a human being would have to survive. And that changed with settling down and patriarchy and everything. And then, because so many things happened that created uncertainty, the figurines were placed inside shrines or temples. And people would go there and sort of beg the deity, beg the goddess. And so she became an externalized thing. Yeah, so I could go on and on about this, but it was so fascinating to me. And to also see what amazing figurines our participants created after having seen these images. After being exposed to imagery that is so different from what we're being shown today. You know, women that look like 12-year-old boys because they have neither breasts nor hips. And that's poisoned our minds for decades now. Yes, so thank you for mentioning the mother. That was a very important puzzle piece for my journey, and my journey with that particular story as well.
Well, thank you for sharing all that about, well, yeah, Creatress of All sounded like a fantastic project. And yes, I mean, our most ancient objects were that nourishing, that rich, voluptuous mother figure. I really, when you were talking there, I really loved the image of the fact that these mother figures would have been in the hearth. They would have been present whenever there was food being prepared, when there was warmth being sought, when there was life, because she was the embodiment of life. And yes, when we then take these images in whatever way and put them into shrines and separate them from the personal, the home, the hearth, the day-to-day, it is that separation. We then lose that direct connection. Our faith in nature, in connection, in that mother, in ourselves, then becomes mediated by somebody else, whoever the shrine is then being looked after by, and so on. So that separation is such a big wound, I think, that we have to heal in the world at the moment. And I'm just so grateful for you for bringing this story and that sort of opportunity for us to reflect on that, but also to face that darkness, that choice that we are going into the unknown.
Mm-hmm. And that, yes, that's something else I wanted to comment on when you said the dousing of fire. That, well, I've told you this story before. I'll briefly share it. I had a nasty experience on my birthday this year where someone doused me with water, and it was very, very unpleasant. I got up. I love birthdays, so I was in a very good spirit. My inner fire was on. I dressed up. I felt beautiful and all of it. And then this person said, "Oh yes, and we have a something prepared for you." And I was made to sit down, and I was given something to drink. And then out of nowhere, a huge bucket of cold water. And that experience really shifted some stuff for me, because it taught me a lot about who do I let into my inner circle, who do I trust, why, and where are my boundaries. So all in all, it was a good experience, but in the moment, it was absolutely terrible, and it took me days to get that out of my system. And it made me think, when you were just speaking about that, it made me think about, yes, can we encourage our listeners and the people working with us to become aware, where do you douse your own fire? Where do you allow others to douse it? And what are the circles that you want to move in? Are these people who recognize your fire, who tend it, who encourage you to tend it, who are brave enough to rein it in? Because as a person who has a lot of fire, I know that as well. It can become too much. It can consume too much. We have this image of a candle burning at both sides, that kind of thing. But also, who are you allowing to douse your fires? Might be people who are present today, might be, old energies, old imageries of people, of the people who raised you, or, And this image of a fire that has been doused cannot be relit. You have to start a completely new fire. And that's a loss of energy. That's entropy that we cannot afford anymore. Times are so turbulent. We need your inner fire to keep going. And so I'd like to just take a moment to encourage all listeners, tend your fires and call in Hestia. That's what the workshop is going to be about. She's your greatest ally in these times of electrical heating and the cold that comes from an overuse of artificial intelligence, from too much virtual stuff. It all has its benefits, there's no doubt, but it's a cold world, and it's getting colder by the minute in the old 3D Matrix. But if you want to truly have an impact, look after your inner fire. Tend it. Be gentle with it. Place some herbs on it so that it smells nice. And allow the goddess to help you, because she's an aspect of your psyche that you can really call to your aid.
I'm just thinking as you're speaking about the idea that we all have things that light us up, that we get inspired by, that we get enthusiastic about. We know people that light up rooms. We know sensations, experiences that, they just kindle that fire. They add to that warm feeling within us. And yes, as you say, I would really love to encourage people just over the course of the next few days, notice what it is that makes you feel warm inside, that has that inner fire to it, that makes you feel bright and alive. And sometimes we do burn too fast and too hot and all the rest of it. And there is that whole, okay, hang on a minute, maybe we need a nice fire that's just the right size. I mean, there's that expression about sort of having the small fire and standing close, or the big fire and standing far away. We want the small, intimate fire that we can nurture and encourage to burn day after day in our hearts, in our lives, the things that bring us passion, bring us joy, that encourage us to light flames around the world, to light up other people and so on. And I think that is just such a beautiful image. I mean, you told me before about being doused on your birthday, and it just sounded horrific. I can't quite imagine the shock when somebody does something that you're not expecting, that just brings you down, that puts out that fire, that dampens your spirit, your enthusiasm. I mean, I'm sure we've all had experiences when we've been really fired up about something. We've been enthusiastic and looking forward to an opportunity to do something, and then somebody just goes and slams it down, pours cold water on the idea, or is discouraging in some ways. It does. It can set us back years sometimes. And many of us, I'm sure, have gone through some form of counselling, therapy, meditation, walking with all these layers of dousing that we've had over the years. Dousing of our dreams, our aspirations, our hopes, the ways that we thought the world was going to be and that we thought we could contribute to the world. And I think moving through that mother figure and toward the crone is perhaps learning how to rekindle that fire. And I think that's why this story for me is such a powerful thing. It's that you are on the point of potential and you get doused, you get put down, you get made small, and it's walking back into that, finding your fire, finding the ways to rekindle it, reconnect, that are so powerful.
Yes. And I'd say what's even more important is that we recognize that we have internalized the process of dousing our own fire. That's the real problem. Because many of us are now moving out of, situations where others are doing this to us and yada yada yada, the whole victim state. But the problem is we continue doing it. And that's one thing that I'm really working on at the moment, because with the coaching that I'm doing, the process that I've embarked on, she continually raises a mirror to all the moments when we, as her coachees, douse our own fire and then believe the story of, oh, now it's been doused, oh, now I can't, whatever it is, XYZ, you put it in. And yes, the secret, this key, the Ankh of Isis, this key to eternal joy and bliss in life is to change the story and to really get in touch with what makes us sparkle and light up. And I was listening to a lot of Abraham Hicks videos this morning, and it's the same thing. Like, really, like, speak out loud what brings you joy. Speak your gratitude practices. Speak the, yes, I'm alive. Say it. It's word magic. It's story magic. And it doesn't even have to be specific, because many people, myself included, tend to struggle with, ooh, I don't know what I want. Make it unconditional. Just, ooh, I love that I'm part of an infinite universe. Ooh, oh man. Just do it. And that's one thing that nobody can do. And in the story, it is the young mother who has to give up the child. It's not the crone taking it out of her hands, placing it into the mistress's arms. It's the decision of the mother herself. And yeah, that's us. That's all of us, right? Yeah. And I think, I truly believe that these times are the catalyst towards that self-responsibility. And 2024 is going to be about that even more strongly, because chaos is increasing. And you can either go down the path of, ooh, poor me, please somebody save me, or you can reassemble the great mother in yourself and go, okay, right, let's get to it.
Yeah, making those difficult choices for ourselves, seeing what needs to be done and not being scared to do it. I mean, for me, fear has been a big thing in my life. That fear of being too much, being not enough, doing the wrong thing, holding myself back in whatever way. And yeah, I think that young mother does embody so much of that. We have to make the choice. We have to do the hard thing, because it is the only way forward. It's the only way to grow. It's the only way to nourish life around us. And if we don't, that child is still going to die, even though that feels like the hardest, most impossible task, because all your focus is on maintaining what we have in front of us, what we have, what we hold, our current situation, and so on. And change itself is terrifying. And I think for that story, it is that you've got that baby, everything's going along the way that it does, and then the change comes in and it is awful and it is terrible, and yet it is what needs to happen, and life goes on beyond that. And I would love to imagine her story in the future, and the story of the child as well that was taken by the mistress of fire, and the child itself who is taken by the mistress of fire. What happens to that babe, and so on. I mean, there's a whole network of interconnections of stories in there. I was last night I went along to Threads of Gold, performance by Nana Tomova, Bulgarian storyteller, and she was talking about this idea of the interconnection of all the stories. And I just thought, yes, of course, our ancient stories, there would have been all these threads of connection, so we would have known what happened to the child, what happened to the mother, what happened to the crone, and what was her story, what gave her the life experience to become that figure who knew exactly what to do. Was she in a similar situation before? And I think we mentioned it way back at the start of our podcast series, this idea of our elders and the fact that the knowledge of our elders is really important. And so many of our older people never have the opportunity to become elders because they don't always have the opportunity to experience the whole range of choice and pain and challenge and difficulty. And yeah, as storytellers, accessing these ancient stories and thinking about them, how they do root us to the land, to life, to choice, to the network that is out there is really important. So thank you.
Thank you. And I would love to just leave listeners with this image of you have got that all inside you. You are the maid, you are the mother, you are the crone. Or if you identify as a man, as a male, you have the prince, you have the king, and you have the old wise magician. It's all you. It's all of us are all of this. And you can choose at any point. You can make a new choice about the energies you want to live, those you want to shed, those you want to embody, and those you want to share. And we look forward to speaking for you and with each other next time. And blessed be.